Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Michael Kevorkian. I'm joined here by my brother Misak Belyan. Misak, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Mikey.
The reason for this video, everyone, is we've been getting numerous messages from our family and friends on the current situation of Artsakh, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, what's currently going on. So the purpose of this video is to educate and bring awareness to our viewers, to people, to our family, friends, and whoever wants to watch this video, just to make sure that they're aware of the situation. So Misak, let's get right into it. What's currently happening in Artsakh? What's happening between Armenia and Azerbaijan on the ground right now?
Mikey, right before I jump into that question, I just wanted to add on to your introduction just to say thank you for the idea. We had people reach out to us, to me, to Mikey. We had some friends even donate over the course of the last few days to the fundraisers that have been set up to aid with all of the situation going on the ground in Armenia. Non-Armenian friends, that is. And like Mikey said, this is for you. This is to educate and raise awareness and let you know about exactly what's going on the ground. It was Mikey's idea. He came up to me maybe a day or two after the situation started, and he said we need to do a podcast. We need to sit down and talk about this and basically deliver the whole message in one shot. So thank you for that, and thank you for taking the initiative. And let's get right into it. As you asked, what's the situation on the ground? The situation on the ground has been full-scale war basically since September 28th. On the morning of September 28th, the line of contact, which is guarded by the defense army of Artsakh, woke up to full-scale shelling, artillery fire, cannons, planes, helicopters, the whole 9 yards. So it started early in the morning on September 28th, and although we have some information that there was loose intelligence that Azerbaijan was planning this for a few weeks prior to the events, but for the most part, the defense army of Artsakh was caught off guard. It just started abruptly, and it's been active warfare. It's been probably the most active conflict zone in the world since September 28th. So today is day number 9, I believe. We're going over there. It's morning right now. It's early hours of the day. So they're getting into day number 10 of more or less full-scale war. So that's what's going on.
So you see a lot of hashtag defend Artsakh on social media. You see that term being used frequently. So what exactly is Artsakh?
So just to give a little bit of a background on the historical context of what Artsakh is. So people seem to be getting a little confused between Artsakh and Armenia. So what Artsakh is, it's the 11th province of historical Armenia. And it has been part of historical Armenia for as long as the history books can prove. However, after the Armenian government, the state of Armenia and the state of Azerbaijan fell under Soviet rule in 1921, there was a political concession, I guess you could say, and Joseph Stalin took that part of Armenia and he basically stole it and handed it over to Azerbaijan in return for political support. And since then, Mikey, the situation has been basically you have this part of a historical country that has now become a part of another country that has been given to them by an overarching power in return for political support. So for 70 years, between 1921 and, well, I mean technically 73 years, because Artsakh didn't become fully under Armenian control till 1994, but for those 7 decades, that part of Armenia was part of Azerbaijan's Soviet Socialist Republic. So during the 70 years of Soviet rule, obviously a lot of these countries in Eastern Europe were part of the Soviet Socialist Republic, so they were satellite states. And for those 70 years, this region of Armenia was in Azerbaijan. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and the few years leading up to the collapse of the Soviet Union, what happened was a lot of these satellite Soviet states knew that the Soviet Union was going to be collapsing in the near future. So they were all calling for their own independence and to secede from the Soviet Union. Same was the case, obviously, with Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia gaining its independence on September 21st of 1991. So during those years, there was a referendum. And what a referendum is, basically, is when you put out a case to the public to vote on, whether they want to...
It's like a vote. You give a general vote to the people to vote on a political issue.
Exactly. So that referendum happened in Artsakh, and given the fact that the population was over 95% Armenian, the referendum predominantly was in favor of Artsakh, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, rejoining Armenia. However, the leadership in the area was Azerbaijani leadership, because that was part of the Azerbaijani SSR. And they were strongly against it. They had basically taken Azerbaijan as part of, Artsakh as part of Azerbaijan for face value, even though historically that wasn't the case. And they declined the referendum. Violence began against the Armenian minorities living in that area, as well as in other areas of Azerbaijan. There was a big Armenian population in Baku, the current capital of Azerbaijan. So violence began against civilians, and eventually a movement started in Armenia to say that we cannot allow our people to stay under the leadership of Azerbaijan post-collapse of the Soviet Union. And since the referendum and the peaceful measures to kind of give a solution to this problem did not succeed, a liberation war began.
And I think that in that part of the world, geopolitically, that's really the only option at that point, because like you said, they held a referendum which was unanimous in Armenia's favor, but Azerbaijan did not acknowledge that whatsoever, which then engaged in the fighting, essentially, the war.
Exactly, and that's what led to the movement of the liberation of Artsakh that began in 1990 on the ground in terms of organizing and whatnot, but the actual war in the area did not start till later in 1991, early 1992. It went on for two and a half years, and despite the fact that at that point Armenia was fresh out of the Soviet Union, no organized army, nothing like that. I mean, we had to form government basically overnight.
No real resources.
No resources. The economy was fully tied in with the Soviet Union, so now you're left with this, giant vacuum on your economic field, on your political field, on your everything. In terms of military, in terms of governance, everything was just a total vacuum. So the Armenian leadership at the time had to basically regroup and overnight create these aspects of what creates a country.
Start from square one.
Basically, start from zero. And we created an army almost overnight. And in the 90s, a big element of what won that liberation effort, what won that war, was the amount of volunteer young Armenian fighters that literally left their countries, whether that be the United States, France, Lebanon, Iran. Obviously, some of you watching this know that we're the type of nation that has a very large diaspora, which leads back to a whole other historical issue of the Armenian genocide. But in the early 90s, when this situation first began, a lot of young Armenian men and women went and volunteered during that liberation effort. And in 1994, we were able to liberate around 85 to 90% of historical Artsakh, which, as I said earlier, was the 11th province of historical Armenia. So it was liberated, there was a ceasefire in 1994, and it's been a ceasefire since then.
So I want to talk about a ceasefire to the people viewing this that aren't 100% on what a ceasefire is. A ceasefire is essentially an agreement between two parties or two armies or two governments where they come to an agreement to stop war, to stop fighting, to come to a conclusion, to arrive to a decision, a solution on which will end the war. To give you some context, we all know Remembrance Day, November 11th, 1918. That wasn't actually the day that the First World War ended. It was actually the day that the ceasefire agreement was signed. It wasn't until 7 or 8 months after that the Treaty of Versailles was signed that officially ended the war. But again, just to give you some context, that ceasefire lasted 7 months, and then the end of the war happened. Armenia and Azerbaijan have been in a 30-year ceasefire. It's been an ongoing conflict that just doesn't seem like there's any end anytime soon.
Yeah, it definitely does not seem like there's an end anytime soon, because what's happening today, what we've been witnessing for the last week and a half, is not the first time the ceasefire gets violated. It's been violated numerous times, and by numerous I mean like over a few hundred times, especially in the last 7-8 years.
Which is crazy to think about.
Absolutely, I mean, especially under Aliyev. It just keeps happening and happening and happening.
There's no conclusion.
Because there never was a conclusion, like you said, for World War I. The guns stopped firing at 11 a.m. on November 11th of 1918, but the Treaty of Versailles that officially gave a resolution to the war. This side won, this side lost, this is what you're conceding, this is what you're keeping, that's it. We're just putting a lid on it. And that happened in June 1919, 7 months later. In the case of the war between Artsakh/Armenia versus Azerbaijan, we never had that resolution. We've had a fragile ceasefire in place since 1994 with no final word on what the resolution is. And that is why it's so fragile, and that is why it gets violated all the time. And every single time, this is not to be biased, but this is just what the situation is. The violation of the ceasefire is always initiated by the Azerbaijani side. And there is a reason for that too, of course. I mean, Artsakh, which this non-divisible part of Armenia, that's what we consider Artsakh to be. That's what Armenians consider Artsakh to be. That's what the government of Armenia. However, it's not internationally recognized as a sovereign state. It's not a United Nations recognized state. It's kind of like what Kosovo was prior to 2008. So some of you may know, after former Yugoslavia split up, there was a conflict, an ongoing conflict in the region of Kosovo, which was a de facto nation for many years until 2008 when they finally recognized it. So Artsakh is the same situation. It's a de facto state. It has its own president, its own government, its own army. However, no one recognizes it. And if you look at any map of the world, you won't see a state of Artsakh with borders. It's included as part of Azerbaijan.
So I wanted to talk about this. So whereabouts is Artsakh? Is it connected to Armenia? Because whenever you look at a map of Artsakh, you see that it's in Azerbaijan.
So it is connected to Armenia. I've been to Artsakh 5 times, and you drive into it right through the southeastern parts of Armenia. There's 2 different main ways to get there, so we're not going to get into the details of how you get from Armenia to Artsakh, but they are essentially.
I'm sure it was a long ride.
It is a long and bumpy ride, I'll tell you that. But it's a beautiful ride. It's the region of Artsakh is nothing but mountains. It covers about 10,000 kilometers square, and sometimes on the internet, on Wikipedia, whatever, you may see it be referred to as the mountainous republic of Nagorno-Karabakh. So Nagorno-Karabakh is the Azerbaijani name for that region, but historically the region is called Artsakh, which is the Armenian word for it. In terms of where it is, so there's 2 understandings of the geographic borders of Artsakh. There is the historical region of Artsakh, which is connected to the southernmost province of Armenia, and it's to the southeast of Armenia proper today. And then there is the enclave of Artsakh, or Nagorno-Karabakh in this case, which is a fully separated enclave inside Azerbaijan, which is the Soviet Union recognized. Like for Soviet Union, it was an enclave, an Armenian enclave within the borders of Azerbaijan. That's what they made it out to be, essentially, right? And if you look at that map, Soviet maps of the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh, you don't see a connection with Armenia. There's a tiny little portion there that is still Azerbaijan, which is really strange. It's kind of like having a Canadian province in the middle of, I don't know, Indiana.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's so kind of like Alaska, essentially.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like if to put it into perspective.
That's what I think of
but that's not the map that does justice to the history, and that's not the map or the limits or the borders that Armenia accepts, because the province of Artsakh is an indivisible part of historical Armenia. And at this point, you can easily travel from Armenia to Artsakh. There's no such thing as crossing through Azerbaijani controlled territory. That entire area is controlled by the Artsakh Defense Forces.
So it's accessible by Armenians.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
So we know the location. Tell me about who's involved in this dispute. Is it Artsakh versus Azerbaijan? Is Armenia involved? What are they doing?
So, very valid question, because obviously there's a lot of confusion around this as well. People, a lot of my friends, non-Armenian friends who are interested in the topic, they're asking me, why are you using hashtags defend Artsakh, defend Armenia? What's Armenia and what's Artsakh? So we already kind of went over that, to say that Artsakh is this indivisible part of historical Armenia that is now, part of a de facto nation, part of Azerbaijan. But in terms of who's involved right now on the ground with the conflict that's going on, the main culprits of the conflict is the army of Azerbaijan and the defense army of Artsakh. And it's actually interesting, that's the official name of the army of Artsakh. It's not just the army of the Republic of Artsakh. It's actually called the Defense Army of Artsakh.
Because that's their objective, is to defend Artsakh.
Essentially, that's all that it is.
They're not trying to attack, they're not trying to go on the offense. The objective of Artsakh's army is simply to defend our land. And I think that's a reoccurring theme with the Armenian people. I feel like, given our history and everything that's happened, that reoccurring theme and objective of defending our land just continues to come up.
Exactly, and it's interesting that they've actually called it that. Because it's only meant to defend these lands, these historical lands that our people have lived on for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. If you go to Artsakh, just to give a little bit of a historical context, when it comes to this dispute of whether Artsakh is Armenian land or Azerbaijani land, some of you may know this, some of you may not. Armenia is the first country in the world that officially adopted Christianity as state religion in 301 AD. And there's some monasteries in Artsakh that are over 1,000 years old.
And so how old is Azerbaijan?
As a state, as ethnic Azeri people have been around for a while, but Azerbaijan as a state is barely about a century old.
And Armenia is a couple...
As a nation state, there was an Armenian government in that part of the world. There was an Armenian kingdom in that part of the world as early as 1600 AD. So we're talking 3,500, 3,600 years.
So Armenia has been established as a nation far longer.
Just like many other kingdoms throughout history, we've lost the kingdom. We fell under the Persians. We've taken over. I mean, like that part of history. Empires and kingdoms taking over each other, but an Armenian nation state has existed as far back as 3,500 years ago. But then, I mean, for example, between the 1400s and the 1918, for nearly 600 years, we were under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. So for 600 years there was no Armenian nation state.
We got our independence.
And then 3 years later went under the Soviets. So we've been right in the middle of that conflict zone where it's just been, the maps have changed. The maps have changed every few decades. And being in that area, especially in the last 1700 years, as a beacon of Christianity. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to turn this into a religious conflict, because for the most part it's not. I mean, it's more than anything, it's a political conflict, it's territorial conflict, it's a historical conflict, but at the core of it somewhere there is a religious element, right? And given our geography, given where we are, given the fact that we are the first Christian nation in the world, surrounded for the most part by Muslim countries, has not served us very well in terms of having amicable relationships with our neighbors. And given the fact that our neighbors are not your, moderate Muslim type of government, especially with Turkey today or Azerbaijan, they're very fanatical in their approach. I mean, to a point where the president of Turkey is basically flirting with the sentiments of resurrecting the Ottoman Empire and an Islamic Caliphate. So it makes things very difficult, but I think we veered off a little bit from the original question that you asked in terms of who's involved. So with this situation now, I mean, 1990, the first war for the liberation of Artsakh, it was Armenians versus Azerbaijanis. Azerbaijanis were getting moral support from the Turks, but nothing valuable in terms of actual military support on the ground. That was coming from other groups like the Chechens, the separatists in Russia. Armenia was getting its support from Armenian volunteers from outside of the country, as well as actually Russia to some extent. In 2016, we had the second war, which we call the 4-Day War, and at that time, again, Turkey's material support to Azerbaijan was not really that big of a deal. But this time around, Turkey, under this, very aggressive leadership of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has basically provided full support. They're actively involved. Apparently, a few days ago, the Azerbaijani Air Force the command of the Azerbaijani Air Force was handed to the Turkish military. So they're fully involved. They have deployed some of their F-16s, which are some of the most powerful American-made warplanes, against Armenia's army. So right now, it's basically turning into something much bigger than just the defense army of Artsakh versus Azerbaijan. Now we have Armenia fully involved, Turkey's fully involved, and there's legitimate fear for a full-scale regional war.
I feel like Turkey first started off as an indirect party that was kind of fighting this war, but now they're fully involved. So much so that actually last week the president of Turkey had strongly supported Azerbaijan in a quote where he said, "Turkey will continue to stand with Azerbaijan with all its resources and heart." So I just want to take a moment just to provide a brief comparison between the resources that Turkey has, the military resources that Turkey has, versus the military resources that Armenia has. The defense budget that Turkey has, according to globalfirepower.com, is $19 billion for Turkey. Armenia's military budget is $1.3 billion. So Turkey's budget is also almost 20 times as much as, and I'm not even including Azerbaijan's resources. I'm just strictly saying Turkey versus Armenia at this point. So they definitely have the upper hand in terms of resources.
Absolutely, it's a very
it's almost unfair,
unleveled kind of if we were to go to war against each other one-on-one, the kind of military capacity that Turkey has, I mean, keep in mind, you're talking about one of the biggest economies in the world.
Oh yeah.
You're talking about the largest population in Europe. Turkey being considered Europe, 80 million, largest population, one of the biggest exporting countries in Europe. Mind you, they're not part of the EU because of all of these situations that they're involved with, and the leadership in EU does not consider Turkey worthy to be part of the EU for different reasons, denying the Armenian genocide being one of them to this day. But in terms of putting it on a table to compare between military power between Turkey and Armenia, it's like a David and Goliath kind of situation.
Absolutely, very accurate to say that it's a David and Goliath situation. So how far does this conflict go back with Turkey? Have they always been an enemy of the Armenian people? Have they always supported the opposition?
So that is where this situation today gets really sensitive, in the sense that it's not just
Artsakh.
a war. It's not just Artsakh.
It's not just Artsakh. There's more.
And there's a lot more to it. And Turkey's motives are almost ominous in this sense. And to see them get involved to this extent only signals one thing. Again, I don't want to frame it in a way that you guys don't know about this, because a lot of my friends, a lot of your friends, which this is essentially, we're doing this for them, a lot of them know about the Armenian genocide.
Well, Canada has acknowledged it. So Justin Trudeau has released statements acknowledging it. So it's definitely a familiar issue in Canada.
Absolutely. And the government of Canada recognized the Armenian genocide about 15 years ago, 2004, I believe. That is what is putting us on edge this time around, more than ever before. More than the war that happened in 2016, more than the border clashes that happen all the time, that sometimes last for a few days. This time is different because of how deeply involved Turkey is. And for those that don't know, in 1915, during World War I, the Ottoman Empire, nearing its end in the last few years, because at 1918 the Ottoman Empire collapsed. But during the last few years, they orchestrated the Armenian genocide. Essentially, the Holocaust of the Armenians, and
Ethnically
cleansing the entire Armenian population. So they did not succeed. However, they did kill about 1.5 million Armenians. They displaced the rest of the population who lived in what we consider Western Armenia, what is today Eastern Turkey. What's happening today is very, very scary in that sense, that there is an intention, and both the president of Turkey and the president of Azerbaijan have indirectly hinted that they are carrying on the job of their ancestors that was left unfinished. To compare that to something, to put that into context, imagine for a moment Germany today decided to start a campaign of cleansing the Jews out of Europe.
Absolutely.
Imagine if that happened again. Imagine if the chess pieces were slowly moving to get to that goal.
Mm-hmm.
What would the world do? What would the world say?
And the timing of this whole situation as well.
The timing...
To wait till a year like 2020, where the U.S. election is around the corner, and we have COVID, and because another question I have for you is, why isn't this on CNN? Why isn't this on Fox? Why do I have to do my own research to find this, where people are dying every day?
That is probably the most important question or topic that we're going to discuss in this conversation we're having today. If this is happening, if Armenians are truly crying out to the rest of the world saying Azerbaijan and Turkey are shelling civilian populations, we have dead innocent people that are not soldiers, that are not part of the army. Mm-hmm. Bombs and missiles are falling 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 kilometers inside the line of contact. And where is mainstream media? So the answer to that question is not just, you could approach it from several different angles. The main thing being that Artsakh seems to be insignificant for the major players in the political field. It seems to be insignificant for CNN and Fox News.
The population of Artsakh is only
150,000.
Yeah, 155,000.
And we're up against a nation
of 10 million.
Nearly 10 million.
You're right, and to put that into comparison, St. Catharines, where you and I live, our population is
basically about the same as this state that is putting up a fight like champions right now.
It's very interesting, and you know what? I always laugh because I go to my grandmother's house, and she's got this Turkish satellite. She's got this Turkish TV box. So I sit down with her and I watch the news with her, and I have to say that, you know, the content that's coming out of these broadcasting, these networks, it's very biased. The people that they're interviewing are Azerbaijan military, Azerbaijan citizens, Azerbaijan police, Azerbaijan politicians. So would you say that there's censorship happening here?
Absolutely. If you look at the record of countries like Azerbaijan and Turkey in terms of freedom of press, they rank. I mean, like Saudi Arabia is probably better for freedom of press than Azerbaijan and Turkey. You could look it up. CNN and Fox and you know, CBC is not showing it to you on your 8 o'clock news, but if you go up on their website and if you look up these things, you'll find some articles, but they don't get the priority. But if you, like with Azerbaijan and Turkey, freedom of press is absolutely zero, non-existent, to a point where Azerbaijan banned any international press from entering Azerbaijan during this conflict. Anything beyond their line of contact is completely banned for international press to enter or to report anything on. Armenia, on the other hand, is doing the exact opposite. Unfortunately, we actually had a couple of French journalists get hit by Azerbaijani shelling a couple days ago in Stepanakert.
That's another thing, right? Like, I look at these reports and I look at these news headlines and these stories, and it's all Turkish journalists, it's all Azerbaijani journalists. If you're an Armenian journalist and you're trying to cover Artsakh in Artsakh, you will be arrested. Well,
depending on where you are in terms of the line of contact, right? If you're in regions that are controlled by Azerbaijanis, you can't even enter that region, right? Think about, like, let alone, is not even an Armenian media personality or a reporter or anything like that. Anthony Bourdain, for example, just because he did a special in Artsakh, he was blacklisted and could not legally enter Azerbaijan because he went to Artsakh and did a show about Artsakh's cuisine, Armenian cuisine. They blacklisted him. Many other people have been blacklisted like that. Like, for example, the Armenian soccer star, Henrik Mkhitaryan. He's played for several different European clubs. Anytime that club had a game in Baku, he would not go because they wouldn't guarantee his safety. So these are like popular celebrities, let alone press, right? And it's completely censored. I mean, most of their media is state-sponsored, and there is no free press. There's actually one Azerbaijani reporter who's very active on Twitter. I forget his name, but his head is basically wanted on a plate if he enters Azerbaijan. And another person would be that NBA player from Turkish background, Kanter.
Yeah, I'm gonna look him up.
I forget his name. Same thing with him.
He's spoken out.
He's spoken out numerous times, and like, you're talking about someone that your nation should be proud of, right? Like, if we had an Armenian player,
Enis Kanter.
Enis Kanter, that's it. Yes. Instead of being proud of someone from your country, from your nation that's achieved so much, he's become one of the most well-known names in the NBA. Instead, you shame him and you basically threaten him for speaking against the violations of human rights that happen in that country. That's what we're dealing with. The press coming out from that side is completely biased. Not to say that, obviously Armenian press is trying to make the Armenian side look good too. That's normal in any country or in any situation where you have a conflict between two states. But there's still some freedom, right? Like, in Armenia, you could still see a segment on the news where they're analyzing the conflict, where they're sitting down, two people like you and me are right now, talking about why this is happening, what the solution can be, things like that. Like, you don't see that in Azerbaijan and Turkey. You only see the propaganda, you only see the one-sided frame, one-sided picture that they put in front of your face. That's the way that they can keep that narrative flowing. And that's essentially what it is. And in terms of claim to Artsakh, I mean, Azerbaijan has no claim whatsoever to Artsakh other than the simple fact that Joseph Stalin stole it for them. That's the only claim they have. Because when we're talking about an established region with culture and history, monasteries, schools, infrastructure that existed before Azerbaijan existed as a state. And this is not something that we need to prove. I mean,
the
history
proof is right there.
Exactly.
So going forward, just to kind of conclude things, I want to ask you a couple more questions. How can this dispute be resolved?
That is the million-dollar question in this whole thing. I mean, we've asked the same question since day one, and there doesn't seem to be an answer.
Because I feel like I look at articles from Turkey and I look at statements from Armenia, and it seems like both parties are not willing to retreat until we get what we request. Armenia seems like they will not back off till Artsakh is Artsakh, and the same for Azerbaijan.
Exactly. I mean, both sides are relentless, but they're both relentless for different reasons.
Correct.
Armenia is relentless for the simple fact that we cannot allow our people who live on those lands that are historically ours to fall under Azeri leadership, to fall under Azeri control. That will mean extermination of the people that live there. That's what we were talking about 15 minutes ago, about the continuation of the genocide, of finishing the jobs that their ancestors left undone. Essentially, that's what it is.
It could start with Artsakh, and who knows, 10 months down the road, they could be at the borders.
And that's exactly the fear that is there, and that's exactly the root cause of why Armenia is so relentless when it comes to this situation. A friend of mine put together one of these, Facebook posts or memes or whatever. I'm not sure if he took it from somewhere or if he came up with it, but it was a very straightforward way of putting it. And it made so much sense. And I think it's the best way to explain it. Basically what he said is, if Azerbaijan puts down their weapons, there will be peace. If Armenia and Artsakh put down their weapons, there will be no Armenia and Artsakh. That's the best way of putting it. We're basically fighting to defend
our land,
our lands and our people. More than our lands, what matters is our people.
Of course. And we cannot fall victim to oppression.
Absolutely not, because history shows that previously, whenever we've been under that control, whenever we've been under we've been the subjects of Turkey, nothing but misery has come out of it. Nothing but bloodshed, nothing but destruction has come out of it. And it's been 100 years that we're fighting for the recognition of the Armenian genocide.
The objectives of the opposition are still the same a century later.
And another thing is, keep in mind, Azerbaijan and Turkey have a famous saying. They say, 2 states, 1 people. 2 states, 1 nation. They consider themselves to be, ethnically speaking, they're both Turkic people. So it's true. It's not just something they say that they, makes them feel good. It's true. They're essentially 1 people, but 2 states. And we're stuck in the middle of them.
So we are stuck. What is next for Armenia's allies? Because you see that Azerbaijan is getting that direct help now. It's direct from Turkey. So what's next from Armenia's allies?
So Armenia's biggest, most powerful ally in the region, obviously, is Russia. In this situation, Russia has been relatively quiet. People are asking, why is Russia so quiet in this specific case? And with that comes a whole other topic of the proxy wars over regional control between Russia and Turkey. It all kind of relates to the policy of Donald Trump and the United States in the last 4 years to kind of take a step back and withdraw from different regions, in the sense that the US is no longer, America first, what Donald Trump says, although he's doing a horrible job at America first in my opinion, but internationally speaking, he's implementing that policy of not having the US be involved everywhere, like they used to be. The police of the world. So now they only get involved in places where they have serious interest. In Armenia and Artsakh, they don't seem to have a serious interest. We're a small country with not a lot of natural resources.
I was just going to say they have interest in parts of the world that is going to benefit that particular relationship.
So whenever the US withdraws from any area of conflict because of lack of interest, whatever, now you have a power vacuum. And that geographic area where Armenia is, the power vacuum right now is huge. Because over the course of the last few years, Russia lost influence in Georgia. Russia lost influence in Ukraine over the whole Crimea situation. And them and Turkey have really been competing over influence in that region. I mean, look at Syria. Syria was a proxy war, essentially, with Russia backing the Syrian government and Turkey backing the rebels, ISIS, whatever. By the way, 4,000 of which they paid as mercenaries to send to Armenia to fight against.
Absolutely.
To a point where
that is more pro-Turkish Syrian mercenaries die in the Azeri-Armenian fighting. This was put out 2 days ago. At least 36 pro-Turkey Syrian mercenaries have been injured or killed in clashes between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces.
And they seem to deny it. But
850 militants.
Yeah, and they're denying it, but they, some of these media channels actually put out interviews with mercenary fighters without realizing that their own government is denying that they've been paid to come there. They interviewed them. And these people said, we came up here from Syria and we've been paid $2,500 a month to come up from Syria and fight against the Armenians. So that's what you're looking at, like a country of nearly 10 million up against Artsakh and Armenia. Instead of, on top of it, they're hiring people to fight for them. And it's just absolutely mind-boggling.
Turkey as well. I mean, Turkey's population is
80 million. I'm not even putting Turkey's army and their power on the comparison table. I'm just speaking strictly just Azerbaijan. If you add Turkey to it, in terms of the odds of military power, aircrafts, tanks, armored vehicles.
Combat tanks. So I have some statistics that I referenced earlier, and combat tanks, according to Global Firepower, and I encourage everyone to fact check this whole podcast. We've done our research, and Armenia has on record 110 combat tanks. Turkey has...
We have 170 now because we took 60 over apparently.
Turkey has 2,622.
Yeah.
Armored vehicles 748 for Armenia versus 8,707. So the numbers are staggering.
It's incomparable.
They're there, and it is truly a David and Goliath situation. So I just want to end this off with asking you, what's the next step for awareness? What can citizens do? What can people do on social media? How can we help?
There's several ways to do that. I will get into that, but I just kind of want to circle back to the last point that we made about what was the last point that we just
resources? We're talking about resources.
About the power vacuum, exactly. So just kind of circle back to that to say what's happening in terms of alliances, Russia, this and that. The proxy wars that Russia and Turkey have gotten into against each other in the last few years whether that be Syria or Libya. Obviously, it's a very delicate, interesting situation in that region as to who's going to prevail. But if we look at the actions of Turkey and Erdogan in the last few years, they've tried to instigate something everywhere. I mean, recently they tried to instigate something in Greece, even. Greece, Cyprus, part of which they still occupy, Libya, Syria, and now they're getting involved in Armenia. And a lot of it also has to do with what's happening in Turkey internally. There's a lot of backlash against Erdogan.
Oh yeah.
And the Turkish currency, the Turkish lira, has plummeted majorly in the last few months. So obviously, the type of leaders, Erdogan-type leaders, dictators of that sort, who try to govern with an iron fist, so to say, whenever they're stuck in a situation where there's lack of approval from the public, they instigate wars, they instigate conflicts to kind of, because when the country is in a situation of war, everybody backs the leader.
Correct.
And Erdogan's done that countless times over, basically. And they've done that over and over again. And he's doing it again. And the problem, though, is that we need to remember that Turkey is a member of NATO. And the shot caller in NATO is the United States. If anyone is going to keep them in check and say, listen, like, as a member of NATO,
put your foot down.
You need to be within certain lines of, but Donald Trump obviously doesn't seem to care about these institutions, these organizations. I don't even really believe personally that he's fit to be part of these negotiations of these multinational institutions. But that's a whole different topic. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to waste my breath talking about that. But that's a big thing that comes into play. A member of NATO, one of the most powerful members of NATO, being left completely unchecked. Mm-hmm. And the member of NATO that has a history of instigating issues all over the world.
So would you say that in terms of what's the next step for awareness in social media and people, we should kind of focus our attention towards America and try to get them to take it?
No. I wouldn't say that. That's something that obviously, as the general public, we have no control over. We've seen what people in America have been doing, whether it comes to their own internal issues, racial issues, BLM, this and that. Have you seen any fundamental change on the ground? No. That's not how America, especially America under the Trump administration, works. That's not how it is. What we can do, what you and I can do, what our non-Armenian friends, colleagues, acquaintances can do, is get educated on it. Listen to this podcast. Fact check what we said. Look into things. And obviously, with the amount of damage we have to civilian settlements, homes, apartment buildings, hospitals, schools. I mean, these guys have shelled, Azerbaijan has shelled anything and everything from hospitals to emergency rooms to schools, residential apartments, you name it.
And this cripples the economy because not only does the
because now we have to rebuild.
Not only just education, but tourism.
Everything. And Armenia is obviously, becoming in the last 10 years one of the more, interesting places for tourists to visit. Our tourism industry is probably our most powerful industry in terms of, GDP and economy. And we will suffer greatly in the next few years because people will be scared to go there. But on top of it, we're still fighting a war on two fronts that could get uglier in the next few days. But on top of it, we have to rebuild. There's all of these different organizations, including the organizations of which myself and Mikey and our friends and family are part of, whether that be the Armenian Youth Federation of Canada, the Armenian National Committee of Canada, the Armenian Relief Society. All of us have set up fundraisers, all of which are going to one channel, which is the All Armenia Fund. Hayastani Himnadram, that's what we call it. And over the course of the last week, we have raised over $50 million. from Armenians donating generously from all around the world that will literally go strictly to rebuilding Stepanakert, Shushi, all the areas affected in Artsakh by the shelling, that will go to economic development, kind of coming out of this rut, really. And $50 million is absolutely nothing. It's a drop in the sea if you see some of the damage that we are witnessing. So raising awareness is more important than donating money by a long shot. Talk about it. Like you said, mainstream media is not talking about it. Talk about it.
Don't just
write an email to CBC, say, innocent people are dying in this part of the world. Why is it not on CBC? Write to your local member of parliaments. Write to your local member of provincial parliaments. Let them know that you as a Canadian care about this major violation of human rights, where a friend of Canada, Armenia, we have very good relations together, is basically going into this situation with not a lot of backup from the international community, not a lot of backup from the major players on the political field, simply because the adversary is an oil-rich country like Azerbaijan. And the other adversary is one of the world's most powerful economies, such as Turkey. We need to talk about this. We need to make it part of our daily dialogue. We need, until we come to some sort of a resolution. And in terms of what the final resolution will be, that will be the recognition of Artsakh as a free and independent state. And eventually, as a part of Armenia. Step number one is to recognize it as a free independent state. So you have a country on the map that says the Republic of Artsakh. And then at that point, we will slowly move into making it one and the same, once again, as it should be historically, the 11th province of the Republic of Armenia. Other than that, at the end of this podcast, obviously, when we post it, when it's up tomorrow, we will put the links for all of the donation channels that you can donate to. Right now, all of the different efforts in terms of the donation channels being set up by the different organizations, everything is being funneled to the National Armenian Fund, so that everything goes to one place, so that there is no doubt by anyone donating or any, fear that it might not be going to where it's supposed to go. So we're going to do that tomorrow, and we'll post that link on here. And thank you for being with us today. And once again, Mikey.
Thank you, brother. I think it comes down to what you said earlier, Misak, that if Azerbaijan puts their weapons down, there will be peace. If Armenia puts their weapons down, there will be no Armenia.
Yeah.
We would like peace. We would like recognition. Misak, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your knowledge. Shout out to our friend Wes of Black Frame Cinema. Wes, thank you so much for doing this. And we look forward to seeing the final result. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Mikey. And on my behalf as well, thank you from the bottom of my heart to Wes and Kevin for doing this tonight, and for Mikey for coming up with the idea, and for moving so quickly on getting this together. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and you will hear more updates from me in the future, obviously. Thank you so much. Have a good night.